Okay. Okay. So, like I said, today we will actually conclude uh, the kings of of the northern kingdom of Israel, and just a little bit of a quick recap of what we've covered so far. So we started the study last year by looking at Israel when it was the United Kingdom. And there we saw there were these three kings, Saul, David, Solomon. There are historical, archaeological evidences of their kingdom, of their reign. And so these are very real people ruling a very real kingdom. None of them were perfect. All of them had, pros. All of them had cons. All of them had, gifts. They had weaknesses, strengths, all of that. But God used them to make Israel the United Kingdom into a superpower in those days. But because of some of the mistakes in the way they ruled, it led to the division of Israel into two kingdoms, Israel and Judah. So the northern kingdom with 10 tribes was called Israel. The southern kingdom with two tribes was called Judah till the end. So this is the chart that we've been using. These are the kings that we are looking at. And so far, if you will see that from the Israel side, northern kingdom, we finished most of them. Two of them are left. We will look at them today. And then from next week, the kingdom of Judah, we will start by looking at Ahaz, Hezekiah, and all of that. Now, I have also given, so today we are looking at Pekah and Hoshea. And then I've also given the prophets who prophesied in the particular time under a particular king. So if you look at the times of the Israel side, to the right of, to our right, you see Amos, Jonah was the one who prophesied during Jeroboam 2. We actually did the book of Amos in one of our studies. And if you remember that Amos targeted everything to the kingdom of Israel, because Israel, though many of all their kings were evil, but they had some really powerful kings under whom Israel prospered. Like Omri was one of them. And, all of these kings, okay, they were quite powerful. Some of them, though they were evil, they were away from God. But as kings, as rulers, some of them were very powerful. So Israel prospered under them. And Amos's message came at a time to Jeroboam 2, where Israel was so comfortable in their prosperity that they were overlooking the poor, they were overlooking the marginalized, they were overlooking and not exercising justice within the society. And so Amos's message comes as a direct hit against that attitude of Israel. Jonah, again, Jonah's message to Israel is not recorded for us in the Bible like that. But Jonah actually prophesied during the time of Jeroboam too. And of course, Jonah's prophecy that is recorded for us is actually against the kingdom of Nineveh, the city of Nineveh. And then from Jeroboam to all the way till Hoshea, the prophet Hosea was the one who prophesied against Israel. Now, going to the Judah side, we have Isaiah and Micah as the first prophets. In fact, Isaiah appeared before anybody else, a very influential prophet. And most of the prophets in the Old Testament happened during this, later period of Judah, before Judah went into exile. Okay, so Israel went into exile in in 700 BC, and then a few hundred years later, Judah went into exile as well. And most of the prophets, look at anybody, Jeremiah, all of them, Ezekiel, they were actually prophets that prophesied during these last few hundred years before Judah went into exile. Okay, so for Israel, there were only these main prophets. Okay, you had Elijah, Elisha, Amos, Jonah, Hosea. Most of the other prophets actually prophesied against Judah because God actually gave more warning to Judah. Okay, he wanted them to turn, but they did not turn, which was a very sad thing. All right. Now, today we will look, like I said, at two kings who were the last two kings of Israel before they went into exile. Second Kings chapter 15, verses 27 to 31. In the 52nd year of Azariah or Uzziah, king of Judah. Again, remember, Azariah is also known as Uzziah because the high priest name during that time was also Azariah. So to avoid confusion, uh, Second Kings mentions him as Azariah because Second Kings doesn't mention anything about the high priest. That is why they continue with the name Azariah. When you look at the same account in Chronicles, Chronicles talks to him and addresses him as Uzziah, because Chronicles does mention about the high priest Azariah. There was a time when Uzziah did something that displeased God, and Azariah, the high priest, went against him, confronted him, reprimanded him. So Second Chronicles has that account. Second Kings doesn't have that account of the high priest. So Second Kings still continues to call Azariah as Azariah, whereas Chronicles calls him Uzziah to make a distinction between the high priest whose name was Azariah. Okay. So in the 52nd year of Azariah, king of Judah, Pekah, son of Remaliah, became king of Israel in Samaria, and he reigned 20 years. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord. He did not turn away from the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, which he had caused Israel to commit. In the time of Pekah, king of Israel, Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, came and took Leon, Abel Beth Makkah, Janoah, Kadesh, and Hazor. He took Gilead and Galilee, including all the land of Naphtali, and deported the people to Assyria. Then Hoshea, son of Elah, conspired against Pekah, son of Remaliah. He attacked and assassinated him, and then succeeded him as king in the 20th year of Jotham, son of Uzziah. As for the other events of Pekah's reign and all he did, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Israel? Now, again, please remember what I had said, when we started the study last year, is that the accounts we have in the, First, Second Kings, First, Second Chronicles, these are accounts that have been compiled and collected from different sources. And one of the main sources is the annals of the kings of Israel and the annals of the kings of Judah. Okay. So these are two sources where the court historians of the kings of Israel and Judah would record the events, because every, kingdom had a court historian. And from that, the Holy Spirit inspired events and, inspired contents that would be necessary for our spiritual well-being. And that is how they were included in the Bible. Okay. So all the records that we have here are actually compiled from other sources, especially, all that we have in the Bible for us, the historical books have been compiled from other sources. And that is why throughout the book of Kings and Chronicles, this acknowledgement is given that, if it's the king of Israel, it's most of the details are in the annals of the kings of Israel. If it's the king of Judah, then it's the annals of the kings of Judah. There is also the shepherd of Edo, the prophet of Edo. So there are all of those different sources from which these accounts have been compiled and collected for us. Okay. Now, there's one thing that we can learn from this. See, again, the assassination happens, right? So for Israel, this assassination became very common. Why? Because they did not have one royal family ruling in Israel. It was always different people ruling in Israel, unlike Judah. Judah, all the kings were in David's line, okay, David's lineage. Whereas in Israel, the kings, whoever was powerful, whoever managed to assassinate the previous king became the king. A lot of times the succeeding king was actually an army general. So very powerful army general assassinated the king and becomes the king. So Israel had this problem right from the beginning. From Jeroboam the first, he was the one who was the first king of northern kingdom of Israel. Right from that, you have, none from the royal family was actually king in Israel, and none from the tribe of Levite or the clan of Aaron were high priest in Israel. So the northern kingdom of Israel, right from the beginning, has been really struggling with these two things. One, their kings were not in David's line. Second, their priests were not in Aaron's line, which became a problem. But for Judah, again, that was the advantage. Okay, so now one of the lessons that we learn from the second last king of Israel is this. See, I want to make a distinction between Jeroboam the first and David. How will people remember me? And that's the question I want to leave with you as we, conclude the kings of Israel today. Okay, the last kings of Israel. How will people remember me? See, every time a king did evil, the Bible says they did what Jeroboam, son of Nebat, did. Okay, what they saw Jeroboam, son of Nebat, do. Now, this king Pekah, who's now the king, right? This king, is almost like 300 years after Jeroboam is born. It's a long time. But in spite of that, you recognize the Bible is associating Jeroboam with idolatry, associating Jeroboam with evil. Because of what Jeroboam did 300 years ago, every king did evil in the likeness of Jeroboam. Whereas any king that was good, especially in the household of Judah, you recognize that king was associated with David. Okay. So if a king was good, the author will say, this king, followed the Lord his God, just as David his father had done. Or this king followed the Lord his God, but not as David his father does. So David, even though he was a very imperfect man, okay, David was not perfect at all. He had more flaws than he had good things in him. But in spite of that, David wanted to honor God. In spite of that, David had a faith in God. In spite of that, David was connected with God, had an intimacy with God. And as a result, every good king was, associated with David, and every evil king was associated with Jeroboam the first. Okay. And as I was reading this, the kings, the account of the kings, this question kept coming back. Okay. How will people remember me? Okay. When, if somebody does evil, will they associate evil with me? Or if somebody honors God, will they associate that person with me? And that is what exactly that happened throughout the kings and chronicles. Any good king was like David, any evil king was just like Jeroboam, son of Nebat, or Jeroboam the first. Okay, so I just wanted to leave this question with you as we continue with the study. And we'll go to the last king of Israel, that is Hoshea, king of Israel. That is what we'll look at. So in the 12th year of Ahaz, king of Judah, Hoshea, son of Elah, became king of Israel in Samaria, and he reigned 9 years. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, but not like the kings of Israel who preceded him. Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, came up to attack Hoshea, who had been Shalmaneser's vassal and had paid him tribute. So all these are actually real kings recorded in history for us. Okay, so Shalmaneser was actually a king of Assyria, very powerful king, and under him many nations would pay tribute to him so that he would not attack them, he would not uproot them. And this Israel was another nation that became a vassal and paid tribute to him. But the king of Assyria discovered that Hoshea was a traitor, for he had sent envoys to So, king of Egypt, and he no longer paid tribute to the king of Assyria as he had done year by year. Therefore, Shalmaneser seized him and put him in prison. The king of Assyria invaded the entire land, marched against Samaria, and laid siege to it for 3 years. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria captured Samaria and deported the Israelites to Assyria. He settled them in Hala in Gozan on the Habor River and in the towns of the Medes. So this is where the northern kingdom, Israel, is taken into exile. Okay, this is where all Israelites, at that time were all taken into exile in Assyria. And the sad part is that after that, we hear nothing about the northern kingdom of Israel. In fact, a lot of historians and anthropologists tell these are the lost 10 tribes of Israel. Okay, what happened to the northern kingdom of Israel, we don't know. In fact, after this, whatever the Bible talks about, whenever Bible talks about Jews and Hebrews, Bible is actually talking about the southern kingdom of Israel. That is, even when we go to the New Testament, it is the southern kingdom of Israel, Judah, that they're talking about. What happened to the northern kingdom of Israel, the 10 tribes? Nobody knows. They were just taken as exile into Assyria. And after that, what happened to them? We just don't know. They are called the lost 10 tribes of Israel. And Judah was taken into exile to Babylon. So I think this is something that, that should break our hearts, because here were the group of people that was the apple of God's eye, right? God chose them. And then because of their own sinfulness and not turning away to God, they were taken as exiles. And, now we hear nothing about the lost tribes of Israel, the northern kingdom of Israel. Whatever we know now is about Judah and the southern kingdom. Okay. But there are lessons that we need to learn from here, because what the last king, Hoshea, did was something that God had asked them not to do. Okay. Right from the beginning. Okay. So what did Hoshea do that God actually finally sent Assyria to completely wipe out Israel and take them as exile? When you look at verse 4, the Bible says, the king of Assyria discovered that Hoshea was a traitor, for he had sent envoys to So, king of Egypt, and he no longer paid tribute to the kings of Assyria as he had done year by year. Now, this was something that, really angered God. Why? Because when Israel asked for a king, Okay, before Saul became their king, when Israel came to Samuel and asked for a king, God had said something to them. Okay, so I will tell you this. This is in Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 16. This is, years before. This is to Moses. God had said this, when Israel will ask for a king. So Moses writes, the king, moreover, must not acquire great numbers of horses for himself or make the people return to Egypt to get more of them. For the Lord has told you, you are not to go back that way again. Now, this is in Deuteronomy years before Israel asked for a king, when God already gave them this guideline that, listen, I have brought you out of Egypt. You will not go back to Egypt. You will not get help from Egypt. You will not go there to acquire more horses. But sadly, all the kings of Israel, including the kings of the southern kingdom of Judah, okay, kings of Israel and Judah, Egypt was one of their strongest allies. They would always go to Egypt. সব সময় ইজিপ্টে গিয়ে ওদের সাহায্য চাইতো. They would always go to Egypt and ask for help. And that was something that God very clearly told them. You were slaves in Egypt. I brought you out. Don't go back. But I think even when Moses was leading them, you remember there were times of difficulties when they said Egypt was better, Egypt was better, Egypt was better. For some reason, they forgot the slavery. For some reason, they forgot the struggle. For some reason, they forgot the loss of dignity. Okay. And that actually reflects who we are as human beings. Okay. As people, sometimes we forget things that destroy us, things that lead us to bondage. We forget that. And every time we go back to our Egypt, see, all of them had an Egypt situation, right? Where God brought us out of it. God gave us freedom. But we have that tendency to always go back to Egypt. And this is something that God made it very clear to Moses. Do not go back to Egypt. But every king considered Egypt as their greatest ally. They would always ask Egypt for help. And even this Hoshea, the last king of Israel, did that. See, when Assyria attacked, instead of going to Egypt, they could have just gone to God. Nah? See, Hoshea should have just gone to God. God made it very clear. The reason all this is happening is because you have turned away from me. Just go back to God. Ask him, God, please, sorry, save us. He had saved them in the past. He would save them this time also. But instead of going to God, they went to the king of Egypt. And that was like the last thing. And as a result, Assyria came, completely destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel, took them captive. And it is just sad that we have. Okay. Now, before closing, I just want to read a few more verses. And, hopefully this will be a help. Okay. The next few verses I'll read, and then we'll conclude our series. Okay. And this is what I'm saying. The northern kingdom of Israel went into exile after this. But the verses I want to read is, the succeeding verses. 2 Kings 17, 24 to 33. The king of Assyria brought people from Babylon, Cutha, Avva, Hamath, and Sepharvaim, and settled them in the towns of Samaria to replace the Israelites. They took over Samaria and lived in their towns. Okay. So once Assyria attacked Israel, they took all the Israelites into as exiles. And then what they did is from different other cities, Babylon, Cutha, Ava, they brought people and settled them in Israel, in Samaria, which was the capital. Verse 25 says, when they first lived there, they did not worship the Lord. So he sent lions among them, and they killed some of the people. It was reported to the king of Assyria, the people you deported and resettled in the towns of Samaria do not know what the God of that country requires. He has sent lions among them, which are killing them off because the people do not know what he requires. Then the king of Assyria gave this order: have one of the priests you took captive from Samaria to go back to live there and teach the people what the God of the land requires. So one of the priests who had been exiled from Samaria came to live in Bethel and taught them how to worship the Lord. Nevertheless, each national group made its own gods in several towns where they settled and set them up in the shrines the people of Samaria had made at the high places. The people from Babylon made Sukkot Benoth. Those from Cutha made Nergal. Those from Hamath made Ashima. The Avites made Nibhaz and Tartak, and the Sepharvites burned their children in the fire as sacrifices to Adramelech and Annamelech, the gods of Sepharvaim. They worshipped the Lord, but they also appointed all sorts of their own people to officiate for them as priests in the shrines at the high places. They worshipped the Lord, but they also served their own gods in accordance with the customs of the nations from which they had been brought. So when the Assyrians removed Israel from the land of Israel and brought people from all other nations, the Bible says when they went there, lions attacked. Why did lions attack? Because, there was, inhabitants, new inhabitants. It was not as populated maybe. And so lions attacked. And so they realized that it was God, the God of Israel, sending these lions. So then what did they do? They started worshiping Yahweh, as well as they continued their own practices that, that was according to the Babylonian customs or according to the customs of, the Avites. All of that they began to do. Okay. So this was a mix. And this is where you recognize, we understand the origin of the Samaritans. Okay. So remember, Samaritans were a group of people that existed in the New Testament times. But here in Second Kings, the Bible talks about how did the Samaritans originate. Okay. The Samaritans were not completely Gentiles, not completely Jews. They were a mixed breed. Okay. Their worship techniques were mixed. And this is the origin of the Samaritans. So when Jesus meets the Samaritan woman, Jesus asks her, and she says that, listen, you Jews say that God can be worshipped in only in Jerusalem. But our fathers taught us that, he can be worshipped in our mountain as well. Why? Because that was the Samaritan religion. It was a mix of Judaism as well as their pagan religion. So it was a mix. Okay. So this was the origin of the Samaritans. But here is one interesting thing. Okay. The Samaritans, the Jews hated the Samaritans. Why? Because they were a mixed breed. They had diluted their faith. So the Jews hated the Samaritans. And interestingly, the Son of God goes and meets the Samaritan woman because he came to save the Samaritans as well. So it actually talks about the profoundness and the depth of the gospel. Okay, the depth of salvation. That here are the Samaritans. Are they Jews? No, they are not Jews. Who are they? They were brought in from other nations to occupy the land of Israel by the king of Assyria. They did not know who Yahweh God is. They worship God, but they also worship their own, idols and deities and stuff like that. And they were people that the Jews just hated. The Jews never wanted to do anything with them, never wanted to associate with them. But you recognize Jesus coming and preaching salvation to the Samaritans as well. And years later, in Acts chapter 8, we have Philip, who is the first person to go among the Samaritans and bring the good news of Jesus Christ in Acts chapter 8. So please recognize that there is no people, no person on earth who is not included in God's plan of salvation. Okay. There is no sin that is out of bounds for God. Okay. The gravest of sin, the worst of person can find salvation in Jesus Christ because that is who God is. Sometimes we, don't want to associate it with certain kinds of people. But when you look at Jesus, he only associated with those with whom society didn't want to associate with. And the Samaritans were one of them. Okay. So in Second Kings, we actually find the origin of the Samaritans. And the second thing that, just keep in mind, this was actually a war policy of Assyria to hinder regrouping. So when Assyria would attack, Assyria was well aware that now they are powerful. A few years later, they may not be as powerful. So their prisoners or slaves could regroup if they were kept in their own countries. So what did Assyria do? To make sure that they would not regroup, they took them to other countries and scattered them. And they brought people from other countries and scattered in another place. Okay, so this was a war policy of Assyria that was pioneered by the Assyrians. And as a result, they did that. And from that, we have the origin of the Samaritans that we see in the New Testament. Okay, so with this, Israel goes into exile, and we do not hear anything of Israel after this. When they come back, when Judah comes back from exile, especially when you look at the books of Ezra, Nehemiah, it actually talks about the southern kingdom of Judah and not the northern kingdom of Israel. Okay, so we don't know. God is obviously aware of where the 10 tribes are. He's not lost them. Archaeology and anthropology may have lost, but God knows everything. And I'm sure he will gather everyone together when the right time comes. Okay. So with this, we'll conclude our study for this evening. I'll give the time to Pastor Agil.
Okay, thank you.